Hephthalites, an ancient people with a mysterious past. Known by many names, like the White Huns, the Sphetahunas in Sanskrit, or the Spet-Zayan in Iranian, they were a powerful group that rose to prominence in Central Asia between the 5th and 8th centuries CE. But who were they really? Let's unravel their story. The Hephthalites, or as they called themselves, Ebadalo, were part of the larger Eastern Iranian Huns. They formed an empire based in Bactria, a region that today includes parts of northern Afghanistan and southern Uzbekistan. These folks weren't just wandering nomads. They built an impressive empire that stretched from the Tarim Basin in the east to Sogdia in the west, and even reached into parts of Afghanistan to the south. But here's an interesting twist. They never crossed the Hindu Kush mountains. That area was controlled by the Alkan Huns, who were once thought to be the same as the Hephthalites, but turns out they weren't. The Hephthalites were a mix of nomadic tribes and settled urban communities, making them more than just warriors. They were part of a larger group of Hunnic states, which included other tribes like the Kittites, the Alkan, and later the Nezak Huns. Interestingly, historians still debate whether these groups had any real connection to the famous Huns who terrorized Europe under Attila. Their story really picks up around 450 CE, when they defeated the Kittites and established their dominance. For over a century, they were a major power in the region, clashing with big names like the Sasanian Empire. They even helped a Sasanian ruler, KhosrowI, take the throne by lending him military support. However, their empire eventually crumbled around 560 CE, when they were defeated by a combined force of the First Turkic Khaganate and the Sasanians. After that, they fractured into smaller principalities, still influential but no longer the powerhouse they once were. Their stronghold was in Tokharistan, and their likely capital was Kunduz. From there, they pushed westward into Sogdia and eastward into the Tarim Basin. By the late 5th century, they'd even taken parts of present-day northwest China, like Jungaria and Turfan. Meanwhile, their neighbors, the Alkan Huns, were expanding into northern India, creating a complex web of shifting powers in the region. Now, the Hephthalites have left us with more questions than answers. Their origins are still a mystery. Some scholars think they came from the Pamir Mountains, while others suggest the Altai region. And their name, Hephthalites, could mean strong in Khotanese, or might even have roots in Middle Persian or Sogdian. Coins and seals from their time give us clues about how they saw themselves, often inscribed with the name Ibadalo in Bactrian script. The Byzantine Greeks called them Hephthalites, while the Chinese had their own names, like Yanda or Yeda. Even the Armenians, Persians, and Arabs had different ways of referring to them, often blending them with other groups like the Kushans or Turks. And the origins of the Hephthalites have been a fascinating puzzle for historians. The most commonly accepted theory suggests that they began as a Turkic group and later adopted the Bactrian language, similar to how earlier rulers like the Kushans had integrated into Bactrian culture. Bactrian itself was an Eastern Iranian language that, oddly enough, was written using the Greek alphabet, a leftover from the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms that thrived centuries before. This mix of linguistic and cultural influences paints a picture of a group deeply connected to the traditions of the regions they settled in. Their adoption of Bactrian wasn't just about language, it extended to their governance and identity. Coins minted by the Hephthalites carried inscriptions in Bactrian, reflecting their administrative sophistication. Even their rulers used Bactrian titles alongside other titles of likely Chinese origins, like Yabu. The Shahnameh, the famous Persian epic, also refers to Hephthalite rulers using distinctly Iranian names, suggesting a layered identity shaped by diverse influences. Some scholars, like Kazuo Inoki, argue that these Iranian traits hint at a more localized origin, possibly rooted in areas near the Hindu Kush. This perspective is cautiously echoed by others who see the Hephthalites as a mixed group, a coalition of Turkic-speaking tribes with strong Iranian cultural elements. But the theories don't stop there. Other ideas propose connections to Mongolic groups, or even the Shanbi and Goguryeo in East Asia. One thing most experts agree on, though, is that the Hephthalites likely represented a confederation of various peoples, rather than a singular ethnic group. It's as if they adapted to and absorbed the cultures of the lands they conquered, much like other nomadic empires throughout history. Now, their relation to the Huns in Europe adds another layer of complexity. Some researchers suggest there wasn't a direct connection, but instead a shared strategy. The Hephthalites, like the European Huns, may have used the name Hun to strike fear into their enemies. Others, however, argue that they were part of the same broader migration from the Altai region during the 4th century, triggered by environmental changes. These migrations not only influenced Europe, but reshaped Central Asia as well, bringing about a fascinating synchronicity between the westward campaigns of Attila and the southern expansion of the Hephthalites. Interestingly, accounts from the Byzantine historian Procopius describe the Hephthalites as distinct from other Hunnic groups. He portrays them as more settled and sophisticated, living in fertile lands and ruled by a king under a lawful constitution. This portrayal contrasts sharply with the image of the nomadic, war-driven Huns that terrorized Europe. The Chinese chronicles offer yet another perspective. The Hephthalites were first mentioned in Chinese records in 456 CE, described with a variety of names and debated origins. Early accounts link them to groups like the Gaoju or the Dayeji, while later sources speculate wildly, even tying them to ancient generals or cultural traits like polyandry. Despite the confusion, many scholars believe these reports reflect the Hephthalites' gradual assimilation into Bactrian culture. Art from the Hephthalite era adds another fascinating layer. Mural paintings in Tokharistan and other regions depict figures in belted jackets with right-folded lapels, cropped hairstyles, and round, beardless faces. These stylistic choices were distinctly Hephthalites and became emblematic of their ruling class. Whether it's the grand Buddhas of Bamiyan or banquet scenes in Bala-Lik Tepe, these works point to a vibrant cultural unity across Central Asia during their reign. And as we were talking about the Hephthalites, their story gets even more interesting as they rise to power and start making some big moves. Remember, they started off as vassals to the Rouran Khaganate, but by the early 5th century, they'd broken away and were carving out their own destiny. This wasn't just a casual breakup, it was driven by the need to escape the pressure of their former overlords, the Rourans. By around 450 CE, the Hephthalites had established themselves as a serious power in Bactria. They weren't just some rogue nomadic tribe, they were organized, strategic, and ready to take on the big players. It's often assumed they were part of a third wave of migrations into Central Asia, following the Chionites and the Kitterites, but recent studies suggest something else. It's possible that all these groups were part of a massive migration triggered by climate change in the Altai region around 350 to 360 CE. These nomadic groups fought for dominance in their new territories, and the Hephthalites emerged as one of the strongest. Their rise wasn't just about brute force, they were smart in their alliances and strategies. For instance, around 458 CE, they helped the Sasanian Emperor Perros I secure his throne, forming a temporary alliance. But this relationship was anything but smooth. The Hephthalites eventually turned on the Sasanians, defeating them in several wars. By 484 CE, they even managed to capture Perros himself, forcing him to pay a massive ransom and take some pretty humiliating losses. But here's where it gets even more dramatic. After defeating Perros, the Hephthalites didn't just stop at military victories. They took over territories like Bactria, Sogdiana, and even parts of Afghanistan. By 500 CE, they controlled vast regions, including Transoxiana and the Pamirs, and they were making moves in the Tarim Basin and beyond. Their empire was vast, stretching from Central Asia to parts of northern India. And let's not forget their role as power brokers on the Silk Road, connecting trade between China, the Sasanian Empire, and even the Byzantine Empire. The Hephthalites also became notorious for their tribute system. After defeating the Sasanians, they demanded such massive payments in silver coins that they flooded their own territories with Sasanian currency. They didn't bother developing their own coinage. Instead, they countermarked Sasanian coins with their symbols, subtly showcasing their dominance. Despite their success, the Hephthalites Empire wasn't invincible. By 560 CE, an alliance between the First Turkic Khaganate and the Sasanians crushed their empire. But even after their fall, remnants of the Hephthalites continued to rule as local powers in regions like Tokharistan. They left their mark not just militarily but culturally and economically, influencing trade and governance in their territories. And the story of the Hephthalites takes us deeper into the fascinating blend of conquest, culture, and connections with the world around them. During their rule over the Tarim Basin and surrounding regions, the Hephthalites didn't just dominate politically, they left a lasting mark on the art, culture, and even trade routes of Central Asia. Imagine the late 5th and early 6th centuries, a time when the Hephthalites expanded into the Pamir Mountains and into key regions like Kashgar, Khotan, and eventually Turfan. These weren't random territorial grabs. The Hephthalites strategically targeted areas that were both economically valuable and culturally vibrant. By controlling the oasis cities and trade hubs, they not only asserted dominance over the Rorans, but also became integral players along the Silk Road. This influence wasn't limited to borders or armies. It seeped into art and culture. The Kizil Caves, for instance, tell a visual story of Hephthalite artistry and connections. Figures in kaftans with distinct triangular collars, crowns adorned with crescents or wings, and unique hairstyles reflect their distinct identity. Even something as practical as their two-point sword suspension system became a hallmark of their innovation. These details show us a society that was not only powerful, but also culturally distinct and influential. Interestingly, the Hephthalite impact also intertwined with religion and art in regions like Bamiyan. The magnificent Buddhas of Bamiyan, some of the largest standing Buddha statues in the world, were shaped during their rule. The murals around these statues tell tales of royal patrons and Hephthalites nobles. Their clothing, hairstyles, and even their faces, round and beardless, were unmistakably Hephthalite. These contributions weren't isolated. They connected Gandharan artistic traditions with those from Central Asia, weaving a rich cultural tapestry. But no empire remains unchallenged forever. By the mid-6th century, the Hephthalites faced growing threats. The emergence of the First Turkic Khaganate marked a turning point. The Turks, aligning with the Sasanian Empire, became key players in the eventual fall of the Hephthalite Empire. Yet, even in their decline, traces of their legacy lingered in the art, trade, and political networks of the regions they once ruled. Their interactions with other civilizations were equally compelling. Hephthalites embassies to Chinese courts, such as the Southern Liang, highlight their role as diplomatic players. These envoys brought exotic gifts, from lions to Persian brocades, underscoring the wealth and reach of their empire. Chinese records even describe their leaders, their shifting territories, and their rise from vassals to powerful conquerors. What's fascinating is how their presence influenced those who came into contact with them. In places like Cayenne, tombs of Sogdian traders include depictions of Hephthalite rulers, reflecting their prominence in trade and cultural exchanges. Even after their political fall, their impact on the regions they touched remained evident in art, language, and traditions. The Hephthalites were more than conquerors. They were cultural conduits, innovators, and influencers of their time. And the end of the Hephthalite Empire brought a dramatic shift in power dynamics across Central Asia. After Kavadei, the Hephthalites seem to have lost their focus on the Sasanian Empire. This gave Kavad's successor, KhosrowI, a chance to push forward with his own ambitions. Khosrow wasn't just content with defending his borders. He had an eye on expansion. According to al-Tabari, he managed to extend Sasanian control over vast regions, including Zint, Zabulistan, Tokharistan, and Kabulistan, after decisively defeating the Hephthalites. Interestingly, he didn't do it alone. He forged an alliance with the first Turkic Khaganate, and together they crushed the Hephthalites near Karshi in a fierce battle around 557 CE. That battle was a game-changer. The once mighty Hephthalite Empire fragmented into smaller principalities, each trying to navigate a world where they now had to pay tribute to either the Sasanians or the Turks, depending on who held the upper hand. Bactria became their stronghold, with a new king, Phaganish, ruling from Shaganian. While they lost much of their centralized power, the Hephthalites maintained a presence in areas like Balch, Termez, and even as far as Bamiyan, holding strategic castles and leaving behind intriguing burial sites that archaeologists still explore today. The Oxus River became the dividing line between the Sasanians and the Turks. The Hephthalite principalities, caught in the middle, acted as buffer states. However, this uneasy balance didn't last. When KhosrowI passed away in 579, the Hephthalites in Tokharistan saw their chance to rebel. The rebellion didn't go as planned. They were swiftly subdued, but it showed that even fragmented, the Hephthalites still had some fight left in them. By the late 6th century, the Turks, who were growing in strength, started encroaching further south. Around 588, they launched an invasion into Sasanian territory. Under their leader, Baga Khagan, they joined forces with some Hephthalites factions, managing to capture key cities like Balch and Herat, before being driven back by the brilliant Sasanian general, Bahram Choban. The Hephthalites kept up sporadic raids, reaching as far as Isfahan in central Iran, which speaks to their resilience and strategic cunning. In the 7th century, as the Sasanians weakened, the Hephthalites faced yet another challenger, the Arabs. After the decisive Arab victory at Nihavand, the last Sasanian ruler, Yazdegerd III, sought refuge in Tokharistan. At first, the Hephthalites in Shaganian supported him, but their allegiance shifted when Yazdegerd's demands for taxes alienated his allies. Betrayed, Yazdegerd met his tragic end in Merv, leaving the Arabs to capture the city and consolidate their hold on the region. The Hephthalites resisted Arab domination with notable uprisings in the mid-7th century. They even managed to briefly recapture parts of Khorasan, with Termez serving as their base of operations. However, the Arabs, now under the Umayyad Caliphate, steadily regained control. By 710, the famed Hephthalites leader Nezak Tarkan was captured and executed, marking the end of significant Hephthalites resistance. Even so, remnants of the Hephthalites persisted under the shadow of larger powers like the Turks and the Chinese. By 718, Chinese sources still mentioned them as a force capable of fielding tens of thousands of soldiers, albeit as subordinates to Turkic overlords. Some traces of their culture and identity endured, blending into the Gök Turks and other emerging powers of the region. It's fascinating to see how this once dominant empire adapted and left its mark, even in the face of relentless challenges.